Alright, so the path was from Lahore to Karachi and the aircraft was A320 Alpha Papa Bravo Lima Delta, and there were 99 passengers and 8 crew members. The aircraft was 15 years and 9 months old and was a leased aircraft operated by Pakistan International Airlines. So the aircraft was flying perfectly fine from Lahore to Karachi. There are actually 5 phases of flight, which includes takeoff, climb, cruise, descent and approach. Everything was perfectly normal. The aircraft had no technical issue. If there was any technical issue, the pilot must have aware the ATC controller, or if the fuel was contaminated, the aircraft at the takeoff roll has the highest RPM, highest spool off, highest climb ratio. So at that point the engines must have been flamed out or would have the engine surge or vibration to it, but there was no problem whatsoever on the aircraft until the final approach. Okay, so now let's look it up at the final moment of the approach, because this is where the things got worse. Okay, first of all, the disclaimer is that this is based on my assumptions and my perspective. There is no solid evidence of whatsoever. This is just me telling you about what may have been happened during the approach and the second approach. So this is just my assumptions. So do not take this as seriously as and I do not take any of the responsibilities or anything. This is just me telling you that what I think about it. Okay, so now let's jump into the animation video and I tell you frame by frame what happened. So as the aircraft was coming to land, it was all normal. There was no distress call. Everything was fine and normal until this audio. Let me play it for you first.
We are comfortable now and we are out of 3,500 for 3,000. Established ILS 25 left. Sir, we are established on ILS 25 left.
So you are 5 miles from touchdown, distance passing 3,500.
What?
AP-03 clear line 25 left.
Roger, Pakistan 8303.
So did you get it? Let me play that again. Notice the bell or chimes occurring in the cockpit, that ding 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 ding. Listen to it again, and I'm playing that for you right now.
Roger, Pakistan 8303. Roger, Pakistan 8303.
So I did some investigation because I was really curious about what that master caution chime was. Again, the chime could be of anything, but most probably in this scenario, as aircraft landed into its engine, so we can assume that the master chime was unsuccessful landing gear extension warning. Let me play a clip extracted from a YouTuber named Captain Joe, which he explained in his simulation video.
So let's imagine you were on approach and just extended the landing gear and this happens. The ECAM is requesting us to perform the landing gravity gear extension checklist.
So at this point, 2 things may have occurred, and this is just my assumptions, that the pilot was maybe in a doubt that their aircraft wheels are extended and it is just a false warning, and they continued with the landing. On the second possibility, maybe that a pilot may have forgotten to lower the gears, but this is very rare amongst the Airbus pilots, as the computers of Airbus are very powerful. There is a system called GPWS, which is a ground proximity warning system, where if an aircraft is in landing configuration, as it was in flaps down, and the aircraft was very slow and it was established on ILS for runway 25 left and traveling about like 3.5 glide path, then upon reaching at certain height, the GPWS would give warning chimes and possibly the verbal warnings that a pilot with the right mindset would never ever disagree that. So judging by the audio clip, I would say he did lower the landing gear, but the landing gear may not have come out and the pilot may have gone into a deception that it is just a false warning and continued their approach. Or maybe, just maybe the landing gear did come out but was not locked in their respective position, and upon touchdown the landing gear retracted, causing aircraft to land on its engine. There are countless incidents out there which you can see some in these footages which I gathered for you guys. You can see that upon touchdown either the landing gear retracted due to not properly locked or by the excessive hard landing itself. Another possible theory would be is that, and most officials are onto this theory rather than the other, that the aircraft was too high passing from the Sabine intersection. Let's make it more interactive. Let's look into the recording and go frame by frame, and bear with me over this please, cause it is a bit complicated, but I'll try my best to explain.
So we are comfortable now, and we are out of 3,500 for 3,000. Established ILS 25 left.
Well, as per the data release officially up to now, it is very evident that the pilots were coming above the approved procedure for speed and height. The voice communication between pilots and ATC controller also revealed that controller instructed the pilot to turn left heading 180 as he believed the aircraft was way above the recommended height and its speed was too high for landing. Upon saying turn right heading 180 means controller felt like they were very high, that they should circle, make a turn and come back again for a landing, but pilot insisted that they are comfortable,
So we are comfortable now.
and established on ILS for runway 25 left.
Sir, we are established on ILS 25 left.
So you are 5 miles from touchdown, distance passing 3,500.
And then the ATC controller said that you are 5 miles from touchdown. According to my perspective, the aircraft should be at 1500 feet if you are on a 3-degree glide path to the runway. So as per the chart courtesy by flight radar, you can see that the aircraft started to descend steeply after 10,000 feet, and maybe, just maybe, the master chime which I talked earlier
Roger, Pakistan 830.
was the aircraft coming too steep that its airspeed increases and the flight computer did not allow the landing gear to come down. As you can see from the manuals of PIA training center where I studied, and thanks to my friend Yasir who provided me with such material, it's written in case of landing gear not down, the oral warning sound and the master warn comes up, and here it says if the speed is below 260 knots then the landing gear is operational. Above that, the hydraulic circuit to the landing gear is depressurized and it won't go off. And according to this chart, particularly the Airbus VLE, which is the maximum speed an aircraft can fly with his landing gear extended, which is 280 knots, and VLO, which is the maximum speed at which the landing gear may be extended, there is 250 knots. So anything above 250 and you lower the gear of the aircraft, the gear may not come out or the aircraft computer would give master warning as you heard in the audio.
Roger, Pakistan 830.
So now let's recap. So we know the aircraft was higher than normal, around 3,500 feet, within the distance of 5 nautical miles where he should have been around 1,500 feet. Well, now we did talk about the possibilities before in this video that the aircraft landed without a landing gear. That was one possibility. Now let's assume that somehow pilots did extend the landing gear where he may have managed to control the speed and eventually in turns lower the landing gear. As we can see, seconds before the crash, the landing gears were extended. So we can assume the landing gears were extending and operational and free from technical issue. Let's continue the video and see what may have happened further down when the aircraft coming near the runway to land.
8303 clear line 25 left.
Roger, Pakistan 830.
So the aircraft was given permission to land, and as per the runway inspection report, both engines did touch down. The first hit was with the left engine at 4,500 feet down the runway, and second, both engine touches down at 5,500 feet down the runway, and the thicker one ones comes from 6,000 to 7,000 feet down the runway. If we look at the runway diagram of Karachi Airport, then runway 25 left is around 11,155 feet long. Here the yellow line is a delta intersection and the building is a reference point, and halfway down the runway you can see in the video the scrape marks first appears at 4,500 feet, means the aircraft was very high in altitude while coming down and consumes most of the runway and may have passed the TDLZ, which is the touchdown landing zone, and then it hits down on its engine. Then the marks disappears, as maybe the aircraft bounces or the pilots were doing a go around, and again the aircraft marks appears. This time it was more pronounced and much thicker, probably around 5,500 feet. Then it disappears, and coming to the building near taxiway delta to the left, you can again see the scrape marks appears before the aircraft goes around. Well, according to my perception, when the aircraft was coming, it was too high that it must have missed the TDLZ, touchdown landing zone area. So then the pilot may have given the call for a go around. So now what may have happened is that the pilot started the go around procedure, which is giving the throttle to its max power and retracting one notch of flaps and pulling up the stick to increase the altitude. But maybe they were very near to the ground and it takes time for engines to spool up once full throttle is given, and maybe the captain or the first officer retracted the gear too soon, causing aircraft to lose altitude and coming down hard onto its engines. We always retract the landing gears once the aircraft starts increasing its altitude, but in this case pilots may have retracted gear too soon while the aircraft may be settling down on its ground effect. The aircraft must have bounces 3 times onto its engine before coming back up, and maybe that force would have been enough to destroy and break the internals of the engines, and it may have given enough power initially that they could go around and reach to the altitude of 3,000 before failing onto them. One thing or the other, the aircraft did land without the landing gear on its first approach. According to this picture, which was taken by the plane spotter Hamza Umar, you can see clearly that the engines have burned residue underneath the engines due to aircraft dragging on the runway without gears. Also, judging by the video of the runway, you can clearly see the visible black marks, which may be the case of engines burning up while skidding on the runway. When comparing both pictures, you can connect that the engines did strike with the runway. And one thing more, when the aircraft was coming normally for its first approach, there was no distress call, no sign of the pilots telling the ATC controller that they are doing belly landing. If they had, then the fire trucks would be available on the side of the runway as per the SOPs. And according to one survivor who was in the plane, Mohammed Zubair, said that during the first approach, the pilot announced that they are landing normally and not belly landing. Let's listen to the recording.
PIA के तैयारे के हादसे में एक नौजवान मोहम्मद जुबैर मुअज्जज़ाना तौर पर जिंदा बच गए कि परवाज मामूल के मुताबिक ठीक थी। पायलट ने ऐलान किया कि कराची लैंड करने वाले हैं।
जैसे ही जहाज नीचे गया, नीचे की तरफ एक दो झटके लगे। जहाज थोड़ा सा रनवे पर चला तो फिर पायलट ने बड़ी होशियारी से जहाज ऊपर उड़ा लिया।
So with the video of Mr. Zubair, I would say that the impact was too jerky and destructive that people started praying and got very scared. So that was something out of normal. So whatever the reason was, the aircraft must have come down with full force onto its engine, and it may have destroyed the fuel housing or the integrated drive generator, as it is located at the lower part of the engine. At the lower part of the engine there are other gears as well that drive the fuel pump and other accessories like generator of the aircraft that may have been damaged, and that is also the cause of that engine being shut down later in the flight. But it is just an assumption, and as this happened, the captain left the aircraft abruptly, and maybe the angle was too steep that the engines may have gone into a compressor stall, which literally cuts the engine power and everything, and you have to start the again. But again, this is just the assumption from my side. Okay, now let's move on to our animation video again, and let's see what happened after it touches down onto its engine and lifted off.
3 report reaching altitude 3,500 feet.
For Pakistan 8303, we would like to come again for ILS 25 left.
Descend left heading 110, climb 3000.
Left heading confirm.
From left heading 110, climb 3000.
110, climb 3000, Pakistan 8303.
So now if we look at the picture again, you'll see that the ram air turbine is popped out. It is a small mechanical wind power turbine that spins with the forward movement of the aircraft and generate enough electricity to power up the hydraulics and primary instruments of the aircraft so that the pilot can maneuver the aircraft. So in this picture, the ram is activated either automatically due to the loss of engines and their generators or by the pilots themselves. And you can also see the trail of smokes out of the aircraft engines, maybe just maybe due to the aircraft skidding on the runway for too long. That friction causes heat up to a point where smoke comes out, or maybe the internal of the engines are damaged and burning up, causing fire. We never know what happened.
8303, you are jumping altitude 2000.
Sir, we have just give me 2000.
Maintain 2000.
So at this point, the pilot must be struggling to keep the aircraft level because there is low, less, or maybe no engine power.
Copied, sir. We are now trying to maintain, sir.
So at this point, a lot of YouTubers and pilots have been saying that why the pilot couldn't land and why it got crashed in the densely populated area where the distance to the runway is bare minimum. Also, some pilots have been saying that he was following STAR, the standard terminal arrival routes and approach plate, while he could have just turn a lot sooner, saving it going to the populated area. Well, for this we have to go to the basics of aircraft turn, what happens in a turn, and I'll explain that now. A lot of people have been asking me that why the aircraft crashed into a densely populated area and not onto the runway, while the distance from the crash site to the runway is bare minimum. Well, when an aircraft is in level flight, the weight and lift is equal and aircraft levels up. When aircraft goes in a bank or a turn, your vertical lift vector changes into the horizontal component of lift to turn the aircraft. When you combine these two, you get a resultant lift vector. Keeping it simple to make you understand is that the horizontal component of lift is what makes an aircraft turn and a vertical component of lift is what makes your airplane maintain altitude. Let's say when you turn, the vertical lift converts into horizontal component, but the weight of the aircraft is static. So as soon the aircraft turns, some vertical lift is converted into horizontal component of lift. The aircraft starts to descend because the lift is decreased due to vertical component is being converted into horizontal component. Now what a pilot would do to keep it level? Simple. He would increase the alpha, the angle of attack, which in turn increase the vertical and also the horizontal component of lift to counter the weight and lost lift and keeping the aircraft in level turns. But it comes with an exchange, and that exchange is airspeed. When an angle of attack is increased, the drag also increases, so the speed goes down very fast, and to counter that we need engine's thrust to maintain that level turns. Also in a turn, the aerodynamic load of the aircraft also increases. In other words, the weight of the aircraft increases due to centrifugal force generated by a turn. We pilots call that a load factor. I'll add link in the description so that you can have a better look and understanding of it. It's not possible to explain in such one clip. But for our unfortunate aircraft Alpha Papa Bravo Lima Delta, we didn't have engine's power. So, as soon the Alpha Papa Bravo Lima Delta went into a turn, they must have lost the altitude immensely, and to counter that, he must have increased the angle of attack, that in turns have made their airspeed go down to a dangerous level, to a VS1, which is a stall speed, and it is the worst nightmare of any pilot. But Airbus is equipped with alpha protection limiters. That is a device to override pilot's input to the controls and does not allow the angle of the aircraft to go at steep where a stall would occur. So Airbus cannot stall. Unfortunately, the pilot was at 1800 mean sea level. He didn't have engine powers, he didn't have altitude, and most probably he didn't have airspeed. It was then a flight waiting for its disaster. At this point, no pilot in the world can save such aircraft from a crash. And now I will conclude my video explaining the crash that I assume may be the closest thing happened. First of all, the heroic pilots did manage to make a turn from base leg to final. As you can see from this footage of Alpha Papa Bravo Mike Foxtrot, which landed around 20 minutes later, they might be landing on runway 25 right. You can see the pilots were almost in line with the runway 25 left. But that turn from downwind to base and base to final may have taken up most of the altitude and airspeed of the aircraft, that without engine's power it wasn't possible to cover up the distance to the runway. Sadly, out of power, airspeed, altitude and options, pilot knowing that the crash would take place now, so they did the last heroic act to save the plane from crashing into the populated area, is that they had no altitude left and was about to crash. They pulled the stick all the way back in a hope to save it from crashing into buildings. Notice that the nose or angle of attack of the aircraft is too steep and still aircraft losing its altitude. This is the clear sign that the aircraft didn't have enough speed and it was near to a VS1 stall. But as I told you before, the Airbus has a alpha limiter protection device installed to it, so it didn't allow the aircraft to stall to a point where it drops like a rock from a sky. Instead, it continued its horizontal path but loses altitude abruptly, and this what happened at the final moment of flight. PK-8303 further decreased the airspeed to VS1 and the aircraft crashed. Okay, so my thoughts on this is that let's put all the things together. When aircraft was coming to land, it did have some issue, as can be heard from the master chime. I can't say what that was, but most probably be the landing gear extension issue. Either they didn't extend or they did extend but they didn't lock, or maybe the speed was too high that the flight computer didn't allow it to open. But whatever it was, there is a procedure when landing and doing ILS approaches. There are marker beacons in the cockpit, outer, middle and inner. As soon the aircraft touches the inner or a decision height and altitude, the pilot have to make a decision that he would continue the landing or he would go around. If a pilot is not sure whether he would land or not till decision height, he has to take a decision of going around or landing. I believe that if a point was not sure about his landing gears, whether it was out or locked or not, whatever it was, he should and must have gone around and took the aircraft to a holding pattern and went through the manual of what may be the possibilities or how to lower the landing gears and figuring out what the problem may be. And once satisfied, he then had flown over the runway telling ATC controller to look and confirm if the landing gears are extended. ATC controller then, by the help of binoculars, he sees and confirms the pilot whether their landing gears are extended or not. not. I believe there was no reason not to go for a go around because according to the METAR code, the weather was perfect. It was a broad daylight and winds were calm. I don't know about the fuel whether they have or not, but a flight always have enough fuel that if an emergency or an airport closes, then he can wait up in the air to a certain period of time, and when he hits its reserve fuel, then he can go to the nearest airport easily. And secondly, on first approach, the pilot didn't aware the ATC controller that he is doing a belly landing. If he had, there must have been an audio. Plus, there would be fire trucks on the side of the runway where upon landing, the fire trucks follow the aircraft so that upon reaching to a complete stop, if there is any possible fire, that can be extinguished instantly. Nothing was there, as according to the survivor interview, it can be assumed that there was no announcement in the cabin that they are belly landing, otherwise the crew may have prepared the passenger for that. Let's finish the video with this final puzzle where most people and pilots are bragging about. Is that let's listen to the audio first.
While proceeding that, sir, we have lost engines.
Confirm you are carrying out belly landing?
The big question over here is that why ATC said that are you going for a belly landing? It seems that there could be only one reason what I can think of. That on its first approach, the ATC did see the aircraft landed on its belly. That's why he called for such statement and nothing more to it.
Clear, Mayday, Pakistan 8303.
Pakistan 8303, roger sir. Both runways available to land.
So, all in all, I don't want to jump into any final verdict that what happens and what was it and whose fault is that, cause I don't know, and that's not my job. I leave all the decision to PIA, Pakistan Civil Aviation Authority, Airbus and National Transportation Safety Board, as they have the official data. Why I made this video? Because everyone has the right to give their perspective of that they think. That is also a freedom of speech. Based on the evidence I spoke and I believed what happened to the best of my knowledge, I claim no rights of this authenticity which are depicted in this video, and it is just my assumptions based on the data which is available to the public. That's it.